The room went silent as Mr. Whitman's eyes locked on Zariah Collins, his smirk cutting through the tension. "I don't think you're ready for this test," he sneered, the words dripping with doubt and hidden bias. Whispers erupted, classmates staring, some in disbelief, some in cruel anticipation. Zariah's hands stayed steady, her calm defying the humiliation, and for a moment, the entire classroom held its breath waiting to see if she would crack. But then, she did something no one expected, leaving the room frozen and every assumption shattered. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead, casting long, harsh shadows across the rows of desks. The murmurs of students rose and fell like an anxious tide as Zariah Collins stepped through the doorway, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, the kind of attention that wasn't admiration, not even curiosity. It was skepticism, laden with the unspoken assumption that she wouldn't measure up. Whitman, the instructor notorious for his thinly veiled biases, didn't even bother to mask his smirk. His gaze lingered on her a fraction too long, sharp enough to slice through confidence, as though daring her to falter. "All right, Zariah," he began, voice deceptively calm. "Let's see if you can handle this pressure test. Most students can't, but perhaps you'll surprise me." The words dripped with condescension, and the room seemed to shrink in response, each student sensing the subtle power play. Whispers ricocheted from one side of the room to the other, barely audible but heavy with judgment, gossip and latent prejudice. Some students glanced at each other, questioning if she could really rise to the challenge, while others exchanged smirks, betting silently on her failure. Zariah's steps were steady as she approached her desk, her expression unreadable. Inside, a storm brewed, a mixture of irritation, defiance, and a careful calculation of how to survive the moment without letting it define her. The classroom, usually a place of learning, had transformed into a stage for humiliation. The pressure wasn't just academic, it was intensely personal, a reflection of every time she had been underestimated because of the color of her skin. She set her backpack down with deliberate care, each movement precise, deliberate, a silent declaration that she would not crumble under scrutiny. Mr. Whitman's eyes flicked to the clock as he began distributing the test sheets, the rustle of paper punctuating the thick tension. From the corner of the room, a few students exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to look away or bear witness. Zariah noticed them. The ones who feared becoming targets themselves, the ones who might later judge her for either failing or succeeding. The whispers intensified, fueled by speculation and a kind of social cruelty that thrived in silence. One student muttered under her breath, "She's going to crack," and someone else laughed quietly, a sound meant to slice through composure. Yet Zariah didn't flinch. Her eyes met Mr. Whitman's for a brief second, a calm, unwavering stare that seemed to momentarily unsettle him. She didn't smile, not yet, but the faint curve of her lips hinted at the confidence she refused to verbalize. The test sheets were slid onto desks, the crisp sound echoing like a starting gun. The timer began ticking, an audible reminder that every second counted, every mistake would be magnified, and every glance at her could be interpreted as judgment. Students bent over their papers, pens scratching furiously, eyes darting to her occasionally, as if seeking confirmation that the expected outcome would unfold. But Zariah worked with a quiet precision, her mind dissecting each question methodically, refusing to allow the social tension to bleed into her performance. With every answer she wrote, the whispers grew louder, not in praise but in disbelief. Some students began whispering accusations of favoritism, wondering if she had an unfair advantage. Others bristled at her calm demeanor, interpreting it as arrogant. What made the situation truly electric wasn't the difficulty of the questions. It was the unspoken pressure of expectation versus prejudice. Zariah could feel it, an invisible weight pressing down, testing not only her intellect, but her patience, her restraint, and her ability to maintain dignity while the world seemed poised to cheer for her failure. The atmosphere thickened. Mr. Whitman's smirk began to falter slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face as he watched her continue with unbroken focus. Some students shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, realizing that the narrative they had silently agreed upon, her inevitable breakdown, might be collapsing before their eyes. As the minutes ticked by, Zariah's calm became a force, almost tangible, radiating in contrast to the nervous energy around her. A few of her classmates, those who had been silently rooting for her, felt their hopes swell, but even that was tinged with disbelief. The room felt smaller, hotter, as if the air itself recognized the tension. And then, Something subtle happened. A slight smile, almost imperceptible, curved Zariah's lips. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't triumph. It was something far more unsettling to the room: quiet assurance. It was a signal that she had already calculated the outcome in her mind, that she knew something the others didn't yet see, and that she was in complete control despite the orchestrated pressure. Mr. Whitman's eyes narrowed, a subtle shift in his expression revealing for the first time uncertainty. The whispers stuttered as if caught off guard, and a few students unconsciously leaned forward, compelled by a curiosity mixed with fear of the unexpected. The tension reached a point where it could be sliced by a knife, the room holding its collective breath. And then the moment came. Zariah set down her pen for a fraction of a second. A deliberate pause that drew every eye toward her. The silence was deafening, the anticipation almost unbearable. It was clear to everyone that she was about to respond in a way no one had predicted, a move that would challenge the assumptions, the biases, and the carefully constructed humiliation designed for her. Just as the timer clicked to signal the midpoint of the test, Zariah's calm smile deepened, and she shifted her gaze to Mr. Whitman, not with fear, not with defiance, but with an almost magnetic serenity. Every student, every whisper, every doubtful glance froze in that instant. The air seemed to crackle with the unspoken acknowledgement that the expected outcome, her embarrassment, was no longer guaranteed. What she did next would shatter the room's assumptions, leaving a ripple of disbelief that none would forget. And as the first pen stroke of her unexpected answer cut across the paper, a shiver of unease passed through Mr. Whitman, signaling that he was no longer in control of the narrative he had so confidently scripted. The classroom, once a battlefield of doubt, now held its breath in anticipation, unaware that Zariah was about to redefine what it meant to face pressure, and the consequences would shock everyone present. Just as the timer started ticking, Zariah's calm smile sparked disbelief. What she did next left everyone frozen, questioning everything they thought they knew. The moment Zariah Collins left the classroom, she thought the ordeal was confined to the four walls of Mr. Whitman's domain, yet the world had already begun watching. Unbeknownst to her, a student in the back row had discreetly recorded her composed reaction to the pressure test, the faint curve of her lips, the deliberate pause, the confident brush of her pen across the paper. Within minutes, the video had been uploaded, shared, and retweeted across multiple platforms. What began as a silent observation in a high school classroom was now a viral spectacle, dissected frame by strangers who felt entitled to judge her in ways her peers had only dared in whisper. Notifications pinged on her phone, each vibration pulling her further into a realm she hadn't asked to enter, where praise intertwined with racism, and bias so raw it was almost visible. As Zariah scrolled through the feed, the emotional weight of the online world bore down on her. One comment read, "How does she stay so calm? Suspicious. Something's odd." Another, more vicious, sneered at her intelligence, while masking their critique in a backhanded compliment. "Cute that she tries to act smart. Must be tough for a black girl to keep up." Each phrase carried subtle venom, a mix of societal expectation, racial bias, and the kind of judgment that had shadowed her for years. The praise existed too, in smaller numbers, messages recognizing her poise, determination, and talent. But the negativity was louder, more insistent, and inescapable. Every notification became a test of endurance, forcing her to confront the reality of being visible in a way that had nothing to do with her accomplishment. Zariah's heart raced, not because of fear but because of the intense awareness that every movement, every thought, every reaction could be twisted and analyzed by people who didn't know her. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a steady reminder: keep your calm, let them see your strength without feeding the fire of their assumptions. Yet the online storm was relentless. The video was dissected not just by students and parents, but by local reporters, bloggers, and online influencers who had caught wind of a story that combined intellect, composure, and racial tension, the perfect storm for virality. Each new post amplified the pressure. The whispers of the classroom had expanded into a roaring public judgment. As she watched, Zariah realized that the commentary wasn't limited to her appearance or composure. It had evolved into predictions, assumptions, and speculative narratives about her entire life. Strangers debated her background, her upbringing, and even questioned whether she deserved her place in advanced classes. The bias was subtle at times, blatant at others, but always pointed, and it created an invisible weight on her chest. She tried to focus on schoolwork, but her mind constantly flicked to the notifications, the comments, the creeping dread that something private had been made public. Some classmates began approaching her in the hall, smiles tight, questions polite, but loaded with curiosity, uncertainty, and a hint of envy. Others avoided her entirely, leaving her isolated in the very environment she had thought she understood. Just when she thought she could ignore it, Zariah noticed a sudden spike in notifications. Direct messages, some anonymous, others from people she vaguely recognized from class. One in particular made her pause. It was brief, cryptic, yet charged with implications. "You don't know what he did. It's bigger than you realize." Zariah's pulse quickened. She had expected scrutiny, judgment, maybe even envy, but this was different. This was personal. This wasn't a general reaction to a viral video. It was a targeted nudge toward a hidden truth, a secret about someone she knew, someone in her immediate environment. Her mind raced through classmates' faces, searching for the subtle clues she might have missed, replaying interactions, gestures, whispers, trying to locate the thread that could tie this ominous message to a familiar figure. The sudden intrusion into her carefully controlled reality left her momentarily off balance. She had always navigated judgment with strategy and grace, but this message suggested a complexity beyond public opinion. It hinted at a story layered beneath the surface, one that could upend friendships, reputations, and the carefully maintained order of the school's social hierarchy. The online world had been a battlefield of assumptions, but this was something more intimate, a potential betrayal or revelation that required careful thought, yet demanded immediate attention. The tension was electric, a prickling awareness that each second she waited could allow the secret to spread further or entrench itself in misinformation. Zariah felt the familiar surge of anger and resolve intertwining with the cautious strategy she had learned to wield. She understood that ignoring it entirely could be dangerous, yet reacting impulsively could play directly into the hands of those who thrived on public spectacle and racial bias. The stakes had shifted from her performance under the test to something far more personal, far more precarious. The video that had begun as a symbol of calm competence now served as a backdrop to a hidden web of secrets, deception, and unspoken alliances that could redefine the entire social landscape of her school. Even as she debated whether to confront the sender directly, a knot of anticipation and dread coiled in her stomach. Every new notification felt like a clock ticking toward an unseen reckoning. Zariah's composure remained outwardly perfect, calm fingers scrolling, eyes steady, expression serene, but inside a storm of possibilities, betrayals, and moral dilemmas raged. She sensed that the next move she made could either expose the truth in a controlled way, or ignite chaos that none of them were prepared for. Every instinct screamed that the balance of power had shifted subtly, irreversibly, and that her response would determine the unfolding narrative in ways she could not yet predict. Just as she considered ignoring the chaos, a direct message appeared, hinting at a secret about one of her classmates that could change the entire story. The walk to Principal Henderson's office felt heavier than the hallways themselves. Each step echoed through the empty corridor, magnifying Zariah Collins's anticipation and unease. The school was quieter than usual, a strange hush that made the usual chatter and clatter feel distant, almost ominous. She could feel the eyes of the walls themselves, as if the bricks were watching her, aware of the viral storm that now surrounded her. Replaying the direct message from the previous afternoon haunted her thoughts. Its cryptic warning gnawed at the edges of her focus, and the uncertainty of what it contained added a new layer of tension she hadn't felt since the classroom test. The calm she had maintained under the public eye was now being tested in private, in an environment suffused with authority, judgment, and an invisible expectation that she could be controlled. Henderson's office was more suffocating than she had imagined. The heavy oak desk dominated the room, a physical barrier between student and principal, a silent reminder of institutional power. Henderson himself was seated behind it, leaning slightly forward, a mixture of admiration, wariness, and subtle disapproval in his posture. "Zariah," he began, voice smooth, almost conciliatory, "I need to talk to you about what's happening online. You've become quite the topic." The words were carefully chosen, measured, yet each carried an undercurrent of accusation. Henderson's eyes, usually benign, flicked with an almost imperceptible sharpness, assessing, weighing, judging. The hint of a smile never reached his eyes. Instead, there was a faint tension, a suggestion that the viral attention she had gained was not entirely welcome. Zariah sat, her posture poised but firm, feeling the pressure in a new, insidious way. It wasn't the public scrutiny that unnerved her now. It was the institutional scrutiny, the silent question of whether her visibility had inadvertently broken some invisible rule, upset the school's equilibrium, or challenged authority in ways the administration hadn't anticipated. Henderson leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. I won't lie, Zariah. Your composure during the test, it's impressive. Many students would have faltered under that kind of pressure. But the attention it's brought, it's complicated. His words, layered in praise, carried the weight of implicit expectation. She recognized it immediately, the subtle suggestion that her success, her calmness, her competence, had become a problem simply because it couldn't be controlled. As she listened, Zariah's mind raced. She had anticipated backlash, whispers, subtle bias, even ridicule, but not this complicated dance of admiration, mixed with unease. Henderson continued, carefully choosing each word. I need you to understand. The school cannot control the internet, but what we can control is perception and influence. There are parents, staff, and students who feel unsettled by what happened. He paused, the silence, stretching, filled with unspoken meaning. Zariah could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. This wasn't about her behavior. It was about the disruption her calm and capability had caused to the social order of the school. Every instinct in her urged caution, yet her mind was already calculating, weighing the potential consequences of any action. Henderson's eyes shifted, narrowing slightly. I trust you to handle yourself, Zariah. But I also need you to be aware of what's expected. I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but his voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished yet heavy with implication. The tension was almost unbearable. Zariah felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, the world watching, waiting for her next move. The balance between maintaining integrity and navigating a system that seemed predisposed to scrutinize her every action was delicate, and one misstep could tip it irrevocably. She felt the familiar stirrings of anger and frustration, tempered by the careful awareness that any visible reaction could be twisted or weaponized against her. Before she could formulate a measured response, the door burst open with an abruptness that sent a shock through the room. Ms. Landry, the teacher who had subtly undermined her during class, stormed in, her presence instantly shifting the energy. Principal Henderson, I need to speak to Zariah immediately. What she's doing it's not appropriate, she said, voice sharp, clipped, a controlled mix of indignation and authority. Her eyes locked on Zariah with an intensity that made the student's stomach tighten. There was no hesitation in her movement, only the raw assertion of power, an insistence that her judgment mattered more than the calm strategy Zariah had painstakingly maintained. The air became charged, thick with anticipation, as the conflict escalated from whispers and subtle biases to a confrontation that was suddenly inescapable. Zariah's mind raced. This wasn't the classroom. This wasn't the anonymity of a viral post where she could retreat behind composure and intellect. Here, the power dynamics were concentrated, institutional, and unavoidable. She had to decide, in the next few moments, whether to comply with Landry's demands, attempt a measured rebuttal, or risk further escalation by asserting her autonomy in a space where authority often equated to unchallengeable power. Every muscle in her body was tense with anticipation, her breath controlled, her posture poised, yet the mind behind the calm facade was working furiously. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about a test or social media attention. This was about her reputation, her agency, and her ability to navigate a system that had already signaled it saw her as a problem. Henderson's hands, resting lightly on the desk, twitched subtly, a small but telling sign that even he was uncertain of the best path forward. He looked to Zariah, then to Landry, then back to Zariah, the silent conversation of authority and expectation playing out across brief charged glances. The tension was almost unbearable, a tangible weight pressing down on the room, the kind that made seconds stretch into eternities. Zariah's pulse quickened, yet her face remained serene, her eyes sharp, aware, calculating. She understood that her next move would determine not only the immediate outcome, but also the narrative that would follow her through the school, through social media, and beyond. Then, as if to heighten the stakes further, Ms. Landry leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice in a controlled hiss. You think this is a game, Zariah. You think a few likes, a few comments, make you untouchable. But some of us see the truth behind that smile. The words, layered with accusation and menace, hung in the air, pulling the room into a tense silence. Every second that followed was loaded with expectation, judgment, and unspoken threats. Zariah's mind raced, knowing that the choice she made next could either protect her integrity or plunge her into a social and institutional trap. Before she could respond, Zariah realized the real twist. Landry wasn't just confronting her about the viral video. She had discovered something far more personal, a secret about one of Zariah's classmates, and the next decision Zariah made could either expose it to everyone or bury it forever, with consequences no one in that office had anticipated. The cafeteria was a deceptively bright space, sunlight streaming through high windows, bouncing off the polished floors. But to Zariah Collins, it felt like a minefield. Each table seemed a territory, each glance a judgment, and every whispered exchange a potential trap. As she walked toward her usual seat, she felt the invisible weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders, the same expectation she had felt under Mr. Whitman's scrutinizing gaze, amplified now by the viral attention her calm had drawn. Students were divided in subtle ways. Some tried to feign indifference while stealing furtive looks. Others whispered in low tones, ensuring their comments carried both curiosity and quiet judgment. The cafeteria monitors, known for their arbitrary enforcement of rules, observed her path with a clinical precision that reminded her this was another stage, and she was the unwilling protagonist. Zariah's movements were measured, deliberate. The sway of her backpack, the tilt of her head, each gesture a signal that she was aware of the audience surrounding her. She had learned to navigate these social battlegrounds with grace, but today the stakes felt higher. The whispers weren't just idle chatter, they were laced with the same disbelief and subtle racial bias she had encountered online. One student muttered, just loud enough for her to catch, "She thinks she owns the place now." Another laughed softly, a sound that felt like a knife cutting through the air. These small, almost imperceptible attacks accumulated, layering tension over every step she took. Zariah's mind catalogued each detail, the slight sneer of a freshman across the room, the raised eyebrow of a monitor as she passed, the way a tray clattered too loudly as someone sat too close almost deliberately. Each microaggression added weight to her composure, testing her patience without a single word spoken directly at her. She reached her usual table, where two of her closest friends offered brief, cautious smiles. Their eyes mirrored the same concern she felt internally. The cafeteria had become a battlefield of social power, and sitting down in her usual place was a statement in itself. The lunchroom buzzed with subtle tension, as if the air itself was aware of her viral notoriety, and the invisible lines of social expectation she now walked. Zariah carefully placed her lunch on the table, ensuring her movements were deliberate, asserting presence without aggression. Even the choice of seat was strategic, close enough to her allies to signal connection, far enough from detractors to maintain personal space, yet still visible to the eyes that sought drama in her every motion. As she began unpacking her lunch, a low murmur floated from a nearby table. A group of students, known for their casual cruelty, were quietly dissecting her behavior online, connecting her composure in class to traits they deemed unnatural, perhaps even suspicious. One of them whispered, "It's like she planned it all. Who acts that calm under pressure?" Another scoffed, "I'd be nervous if I were her. Doesn't she ever crack?" The layered implication was clear. They weren't just judging her academic skill, they were challenging her identity, questioning her place, insinuating that her poise was an anomaly that needed explanation. Zariah felt the familiar churn of frustration and restraint, the emotional push and pull that came with being observed through the lens of prejudice. She responded with a controlled inhale, reminding herself that composure was her weapon, and visible reactions were liabilities in this subtle, emotional war. The cafeteria monitor's eyes flicked toward her again, the familiar scrutiny, sharp and judgmental. It was the kind of gaze that could make a student feel guilty for sitting too confidently, for moving too deliberately, for existing in a space where their presence was unwelcome. Zariah's friends exchanged nervous glances, whispering cautions about how much attention she was drawing. But Zariah understood the deeper stakes. Yielding to intimidation would signal weakness, confirming the unspoken assumptions of those who doubted her. She maintained her posture, eating slowly, deliberately, allowing the silence around her to amplify her quiet control. Every glance she met, every subtle smirk she deflected, built an invisible web of authority that was hers by intellect, composure, and resilience rather than force or confrontation. Even as she navigated these intricacies, Zariah sensed that the situation was shifting. A minor disagreement between two students at a nearby table, initially unrelated to her, began to escalate. Voices, quiet at first, rose just enough to be heard, tension flaring in a controlled spiral of miscommunication. One student accused another of taking their lunch item, words flung with irritation, eyes darting nervously towards Zariah, as if the drama required her acknowledgement. The cafeteria's dynamic was delicate, socially calibrated, and her presence in the midst of it made her a focal point, whether she wanted it or not. The escalation was subtle at first, a sharp glance, a clipped tone, but it grew quickly into a magnet for attention. Every student's gaze seemed to pivot toward her, consciously or unconsciously, anticipating her reaction, silently judging whether she would break, intervene or retreat. Zariah's internal calculation was precise. She could respond, diffuse the situation, or maintain strict neutrality. Each option carried implications. Reacting would expose her to criticism, both from peers who sought drama, and from adults who monitored behavior through an implicit lens of bias. Staying silent could signal weakness, reinforce whispered assumptions, and invite further scrutiny. Yet in that charged moment, she realized an unexpected opportunity had presented itself. If she navigated this carefully, she could assert her moral authority subtly, without overt confrontation, demonstrating her control not just over her composure but over the social environment itself. The murmur of voices grew louder, and one of the arguing students began gesturing toward her, almost involuntarily, as though expecting her to intervene. Heads turned across the cafeteria. A ripple of tension ran through the room as everyone waited, holding their breath for the reaction of the girl who had already become a symbol of composure under pressure. Even the cafeteria monitors leaned slightly forward, sensing that something was about to occur that would shift the social equilibrium. Zariah's chest tightened slightly, not with fear but with awareness that the choices she made in the next moments would have consequences far beyond lunchroom gossip. The stakes were suddenly amplified. Her calm had been observed, dissected, and judged, and now the school's social hierarchy had turned its full gaze toward her. As the argument between the other students teetered on the edge of escalation, Zariah felt a subtle shift. A classmate she hadn't expected to be involved glanced nervously in her direction. The same one whose indirect whispers had fueled previous judgments about her viral video. There was a tension in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that her next move could either deflate the confrontation or ignite a broader social storm. The cafeteria seemed to freeze in anticipation, every sound muted except for the low hum of distant conversation, the scraping of chairs, and the sharp, subtle intake of breath from students waiting to see whether Zariah would react. When a minor disagreement escalated into a heated confrontation, Zariah found herself unexpectedly at the center, everyone watching, waiting for her to break, and the next decision she made could either expose hidden truths or shift the entire balance of power in the cafeteria forever. The following morning, Zariah Collins returned to class with the same quiet determination she had carried through the viral storm and the cafeteria tension. Yet, the energy in the room felt different, heavier, almost palpable, as if anticipation had settled into the very air. Students whispered, their hushed voices laced with speculation about the video, the cafeteria confrontation, and the ripple of attention Zariah now attracted. The atmosphere was taut, delicate, and electrified, every glance and gesture charged with meaning. It wasn't just curiosity that followed her anymore. It was expectation, judgment, and subtle hostility. Every student seemed to measure her in their own way, trying to predict whether the composure she displayed would hold under another pressure, another test, another moment where she could be undermined. Ms. Landry, usually composed and admired for her clarity and instruction, seemed to be carrying a different air that day. There was a sharpness to her movements, a calculated precision in the way she set her papers down, the subtle tilt of her head as she scanned the room. When her gaze settled on Zariah, the classroom temperature seemed to drop, as though the very walls recognized the tension she was about to impose. "Zariah," she said, voice deceptively neutral, "I hope you understand that excelling isn't always just about talent. Sometimes, it's also about knowing where you belong." The words were casual, almost conversational, but underneath them lurked a deeply rooted insinuation, a subtle echo of bias that had haunted countless students before her. The phrasing was deliberate, a question wrapped in an accusation, a compliment tangled with condescension. Zariah's pulse remained steady, but her mind registered every nuance. She recognized the historical undertones of Landry's statement, the familiar, uncomfortable suggestion that excellence from a black student needed contextual justification, that her calm and intelligence could not simply exist without explanation. It was a trap dressed as guidance, a test far more insidious than any academic challenge. The classroom fell quiet as students processed the interaction, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, others whispering low speculation. Their attention was now fully captured, as if the very act of being observed could alter the outcome. Zariah's awareness heightened, each sense sharpened to detect the faintest shift in tone, posture, or intention. Ms. Landry continued, moving with calculated ease to her desk. "You've been getting a lot of attention lately," she said, words carefully measured. "Attention that might not always be beneficial. Sometimes it's better to let things pass unnoticed. Don't you think?" The question hung in the air, an invisible boundary drawn around Zariah's behavior, around her ambition, around her mere presence. The implication was clear. There were limits she was expected to respect, unspoken rules designed to maintain the comfort of those around her. Zariah recognized the subtle intimidation. It wasn't in yelling or public shaming. It was in the soft precision, the insinuation that her success and visibility had become a problem, and that she alone had the power to correct it. Zariah took a slow breath, maintaining outward composure while her mind strategized. She could feel the quiet curiosity and discomfort of her classmates, the subtle bias radiating from Ms. Landry, and the invisible surveillance of authority that had grown far beyond the classroom. Every student's body language was a variable to account for. The tense shoulders of those who admired her, the barely suppressed smirks of those who doubted her, the wide-eyed nervousness of those who recognized that the social balance was shifting. Her calm, once a simple shield, now became a tool of subtle resistance, a way to assert presence without confrontation, to maintain dignity in the face of quiet oppression. Landry's voice cut through the internal calculation. "Sharper this time. Some of us worry that your behavior sets expectations that others simply can't meet," she said, a faint smile playing at the edges of her lips. The insinuation was unmistakable. Zariah's competence, her calm, her visibility, these were dangerous in the eyes of some, destabilizing to the classroom's delicate social equilibrium. A few students shifted in their seats, sensing the underlying bias, the subtle manipulation, yet unsure whether to side with the teacher, with the student, or to remain invisible. Zariah felt the familiar coil of anger and resolve in her chest, tempered by the awareness that any reaction had to be precise, calculated, and undeniable in its effect. As she processed the words, she noticed a faint ripple of unease pass through the classroom. Students who had previously whispered now cast glances, filled with uncertainty, some admiration, some skepticism. It was the first visible shift in the room's social dynamic since the morning began. Zariah's strategy was clear: let the tension rise, let the subtle hostility manifest fully, and then use it to redefine the room's understanding of power, competence, and composure. She allowed her gaze to sweep the room slowly, deliberately, meeting eyes, asserting a silent claim over the narrative. The effect was immediate. Whispers faltered, glances lingered, and Ms. Landry's composure, usually unshakable, displayed the faintest flicker of discomfort. Then, with a calculated subtlety, Zariah acted. She raised her hand slightly, not in the conventional gesture for a question, but to draw attention to a small, precise observation that highlighted a critical flaw in the day's lesson plan. Something only someone who had been paying complete attention could notice. The correction was factual, neutral, and impeccably delivered, yet it carried an undeniable weight. It subtly demonstrated her intellect, her focus, and her ability to command the room without raising her voice or betraying emotion. The classroom went silent, the tension crystallizing as students realized that Landry's attempt to undermine her had been countered with calm precision. The teacher's carefully constructed authority wavered, a subtle acknowledgement that the social and intellectual balance of power had shifted, at least momentarily, in favor of the student she had tried to control. A quiet gasp rippled across the classroom, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable in its significance. Students leaned forward, curiosity and disbelief mingling as they tried to process the reversal. Landry's expression, carefully maintained until now, faltered for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of surprise, a flicker of recognition that her subtle manipulation had failed. Zariah's calm smile remained, serene, unshaken, yet it carried the unmistakable force of quiet triumph, the kind that doesn't need loud declaration, but whose impact is undeniable. She had navigated the trap, asserting authority not through confrontation, but through precision, intellect, and emotional mastery. The classroom remained still, every eye focused, every breath suspended, as the students processed the unexpected turn of events. Landry, usually composed, now found herself in unfamiliar territory. Her carefully constructed narrative had been disrupted, her subtle biases exposed in the quietest possible way. The room had shifted. The hierarchy, long assumed, was temporarily inverted. Zariah had not only defended herself, but also subtly demonstrated that intellect, composure, and dignity could counter manipulation, bias, and the quiet tools of racial prejudice. Just as Zariah prepared to return to her work, a soft ping from a student's phone drew everyone's attention. A new video had been posted, one she hadn't seen, showing a moment from the test she thought private, and the revelation it contained threatened to undo the careful balance she had just established, leaving the classroom and everyone in it frozen in stunned anticipation. The first video of Zariah Collins' classroom composure had started as a quiet ripple, a short clip captured on a student's phone, but within hours it became a tidal wave. Notifications flooded her phone in rapid succession, each ping a reminder that the world was now watching, judging and dissecting her every move. What had been a controlled, private display of focus and calm had spilled into the public sphere, where context was optional and interpretation often fueled by bias. The video traveled quickly from school groups to local social media pages, and then beyond, landing in feeds populated by strangers who had never seen her in person yet felt entitled to declare the meaning of her actions. Zariah watched the storm unfold, with a combination of fascination, frustration, and quiet calculation. Some comments were positive, praising her poise and intellect in the face of undue pressure, acknowledging her ability to maintain dignity while everyone expected her to falter. But alongside the praise was a tidal wave of hostility, often subtle but no less damaging. One post suggested, "Notice how she acts so composed. Do you really think that's normal for someone like her?" Another more overt read, "She's smart. Sure, but people like her don't belong in advanced classes. Someone should put her in her place." The undercurrent of racial judgment was unmistakable, an invisible force shaping the perception of her success. Each new notification added weight, a reminder that the digital world was a magnifying glass that could warp perception into something cruel and false. Zariah's attention to every detail of the post, the phrasing, the likes, the shares, the subtle biases embedded in emojis and GIFs she refused to engage with, was deliberate. She recognized that this was more than personal commentary, it was a social litmus test of bias, privilege, and societal expectation. The quiet frustration she had mastered in the classroom now met the sprawling unpredictability of the online world, a battlefield where control was always partial and judgment instantaneous. As she scrolled, the video's comments section became an ideological arena. People who had never met her argued vehemently about what her calmness meant. Was it natural, exceptional, or calculated? Many assumed motives she had never considered, projecting fears and biases onto her every facial expression, every subtle hand movement. The racial subtext was sharp and unrelenting, threaded through comments in ways that highlighted systemic prejudice. Some applauded her confidence, while others implicitly questioned her right to claim that space. Even the news feeds carried undertones. Articles describing the viral clip often framed her as unexpectedly calm or surprisingly competent, subtle phrases that implied that such behavior was remarkable only because of her race. Zariah felt the pressure of this attention acutely. In the classroom, her composure had been enough to navigate bias and expectation with strategy and poise. Online, however, her calm had become a symbol, a point of debate she could not fully control. Every share, every comment, every reaction was a reflection of public perception rather than reality. The emotional burden was heavier, a combination of frustration, anticipation, and moral tension that pressed against her rational mind. She understood that any public response could be dissected, twisted, or weaponized in ways that extended far beyond her immediate community. Despite the intensity, Zariah maintained her outward calm. She scrolled with careful attention, cataloging patterns, noticing recurring assumptions, and noting the subtle biases of those who commented under pseudonyms. A few comments stood out, indirect threats, attempts to shame her, or assumptions about her upbringing and character. They weren't violent or overtly aggressive, but the emotional and racial undertones were unmistakable, piercing in a way that forced reflection. For every supportive comment, there seemed to be another that sought to diminish her presence, her intellect, or her right to succeed without justification. The emotional strain was exhausting, yet Zariah treated it as a challenge, a mental exercise of navigating bias, calculating her next steps, and measuring the stakes of visibility. The unexpected twist came as she navigated through the comment threads. A stranger, whose profile suggested they had no affiliation with the school, posted a cryptic comment that made her pause. "Not everything you see is what it seems. That video doesn't show everything. Someone edited more than you know." The words were brief but loaded, insinuating deception or manipulation within the clip that had already gone viral. Her pulse quickened, and a chill ran down her spine. Until that moment, she had been focused on public perception, personal integrity, and navigating bias. Now, there was a possibility that the narrative she thought she controlled through calm composure and strategic silence might be built on something incomplete, something intentionally manipulated. Zariah's mind immediately began tracing possibilities. Had someone at school altered the clip? Was there context missing that could change public opinion? Or worse, fuel further racial bias? The thought that her calm, calculated behavior could be reframed in a way that harmed her reputation, her family, and even her future weighed heavily. Her focus sharpened. She understood that the next steps would require subtlety, strategy, and careful observation. She had already learned how to navigate prejudice in classrooms, cafeterias, and through casual gossip. The online sphere was new territory, broader, more public, and emotionally treacherous. But the principle remained the same. Composure and clarity were her only ally. The tension escalated further when she noticed that the cryptic comment had attracted replies, some questioning its validity, others speculating wildly about motives and hidden truths. The digital crowd, now amplified beyond the school walls, was hungry for drama, scandal, and confrontation. Zariah recognized the trap. Speculation was contagious, and if left unaddressed, assumptions could spread faster than reality. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, mind weighing the consequences of any engagement. Responding could clarify or inflame, ignoring could signal indifference or weakness. The emotional calculus was complex, delicate, and utterly consuming. Even as she deliberated, the viral storm around her expanded. Influencers shared the clip, framing it as a moment of inspiration, while others highlighted her race in ways that revealed implicit biases. The commentary split sharply along ideological and racial lines, creating a fragmented narrative where the same behavior, calm, focused, disciplined, was simultaneously celebrated, questioned, and disparaged. Zariah realized that every new interpretation, every repost, every subtle editorial comment could shape public perception in ways she could not entirely predict. The emotional stakes were enormous. Her integrity, her dignity, and her identity were now intertwined with a narrative shaped by countless strangers' assumptions. The cryptic comment continued to linger in her mind, an invisible weight she could not ignore. Its implications were immediate. Someone was suggesting a hidden reality behind the viral footage, a truth that could destabilize the careful image she had cultivated through composure and intelligence. She felt the tension rise, a combination of anticipation, unease, and strategic awareness. Every second that passed without action increased the risk that the video's narrative could be twisted, edited, or misinterpreted in ways that compounded existing prejudice. Just as Zariah decided how or whether to respond, another notification appeared, a private message from an unknown user containing a short, ambiguous clip that suggested the viral video had been altered in ways that could unravel everything she thought she controlled, leaving her poised at the edge of a revelation that could change the story entirely. The sun had begun its slow descent when Zariah Collins left school, the golden light casting long shadows across the streets she had walked countless times. Normally the route home was mundane, uneventful, a familiar path bordered by neat lawns and quiet sidewalks. Today, however, every step felt heavier, as though the viral attention and the school's internal scrutiny had followed her into the outside world. The crisp autumn air should have been calming, but it carried a tension she couldn't shake. Her mind, already occupied by the cryptic online clip and the subtle conflicts at school, registered every sound: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the faint bark of a dog, and finally the unmistakable presence of a police car slowly following at an unnervingly consistent pace. At first Zariah tried to dismiss it, attributing it to coincidence, yet the vehicle mirrored her every turn, every subtle change of pace. Her pulse quickened, though she kept her steps measured, exuding calm even as internal tension escalated. Her senses sharpened. There was a rhythm to the officer's presence, a watchful intent that felt invasive, precise, and unnervingly deliberate. Every instinct whispered that this was no ordinary patrol. Then, the car's lights flashed, not the bright, alarming red and blue of an emergency, but the subtle, controlled signal that meant pull over. Zariah felt a chill ripple down her spine. She knew why. She had read, seen, and understood the countless stories of people like her. Black, composed, capable, being singled out for suspicion without reason. She obeyed, easing her pace until she reached the sidewalk beside the car. The officer stepped out, tall and imposing, with a clipped voice that carried authority, scrutiny, and an undercurrent of expectation. "Evening, miss. Mind telling me why you're walking alone?" The words were casual, almost benign in tone, yet they carried the unspoken implication of judgment and threat. Zariah maintained her calm, hands visible at her sides, posture upright, every motion deliberate. "Just walking home from school," she replied evenly, careful not to hint at the storm brewing in her mind. Her voice was steady, but internally the pulse of adrenaline throbbed against her ribs. The officer's gaze flicked to her backpack, then to the sidewalk, then back to her eyes, sharp and calculating. "You don't live around here, do you? Or maybe you're just wandering." His questions, layered with suspicion, were designed not for information but for control, an invisible test meant to unsettle her. Zariah's mind catalogued the subtle microaggressions, the narrowing of his eyes, the slight shift of weight that implied he was ready to escalate, the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong in this space. She held her composure, the product of years of navigating a world where bias was subtle yet omnipresent, a world where intelligence, grace, and dignity were constantly scrutinized and challenged. As he spoke, another officer arrived, joining silently beside the first, creating a triangle of observation that felt suffocating. Zariah noticed the subtle coordination, the unspoken dialogue in their posture and glance, the way one's hand lingered near the holster, while the other subtly assessed her movements. She recognized the dynamics immediately. The situation was designed to intimidate, to assert dominance without overt aggression, a psychological game where her reaction was the prize. Her heartbeat increased, though she kept her body calm, calculating each response, aware that any visible panic could be weaponized. "Do you have ID?" the first officer asked, voice calm but insistent. It was a reasonable request on the surface, yet the underlying implication was unmistakable. Her presence, her calm, her very existence in public was suspicious, an anomaly that needed documentation. Zariah reached into her backpack with deliberate slowness, producing her school ID. The moment felt stretched, almost ritualistic, a test of patience and composure. The officers examined it briefly, the silence amplified by the distant sounds of the neighborhood. Every small rustle or passing vehicle heightened in perception. It was a silent assertion. She was being watched, judged, and controlled by systems that assumed guilt based on nothing but perception and bias. Just as she thought the exchange might end, a sharp, unexpected comment came from one of the officers. "Funny, you're calm. Most people your age would be nervous. You sure you're just walking home?" The phrasing carried multiple layers: skepticism, subtle mockery, and an underlying challenge. Zariah's eyes didn't waver. She could feel the tension radiating from the other officer, a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't a typical stop. Her mind raced, weighing options, every word and gesture calculated. She understood that defiance, visible anger, or hesitation could escalate the encounter beyond control. Yet, remaining entirely passive could signal acquiescence, a concession that her presence and composure were somehow inappropriate. Then, the twist occurred. As the first officer leaned slightly closer, Zariah noticed movement in a nearby yard, an adult filming the encounter on their phone, a witness she hadn't expected. The presence of an external observer changed the dynamic subtly, but irrevocably. The officer's postures stiffened imperceptibly, the psychological tension shifting slightly, as the realization dawned that their actions were now potentially documented. Zariah felt a surge of both relief and caution, aware that the recorded presence added a layer of protection but also an unpredictable element. Someone could misinterpret or manipulate the footage. Despite the subtle shift, the tension did not dissipate. The first officer's hand brushed the side of his belt, a movement meant to intimidate without overt aggression. Zariah recognized the silent message. "I could escalate, but I'm testing your response." She kept her calm, her posture straight, her voice controlled, responding only to what was asked. "I'm heading home from school," she said again, precise and measured. The words were simple, neutral, yet carried an undercurrent of assertion. She was not fleeing. She was not panicked. She was not a threat. For a moment it seemed the encounter might conclude. Zariah sensed that she had successfully navigated the initial wave of suspicion, that composure and strategy had kept the interaction from becoming overtly hostile. The adrenaline that had thrummed in her veins began to ease slightly, her body relaxing just enough to believe the ordeal might end without further escalation. But then the unexpected occurred. The officer asked her to step aside from the sidewalk, into the dimly lit edge of the street, ostensibly for clarification. Zariah froze for a fraction of a second, recognizing the implicit threat. Stepping off the familiar path, into a less public space, removed witnesses and amplified vulnerability. Her internal awareness flared. This was no longer a simple stop. This was an assertion of control designed to isolate, to unsettle, and to remind her that her visibility and composure did not exempt her from suspicion. She could feel the pulse of judgment in the officer's stance, the calculated confidence in the positioning of both men, the underlying assumption that her body and movements could be controlled if challenged. Every step into that marginal space felt heavier, each inch a subtle negotiation between compliance and the preservation of autonomy. Just when Zariah thought it was over, the officer's unexpected action, a sharp gesture signaling a more invasive check, escalated the encounter, creating a situation that threatened to destroy her sense of security, leaving her poised on the edge of fear, anger, and the need to act with impeccable precision. Simone Collins' heels clicked sharply against the polished floors of the corporate office, a sound that carried authority, urgency, and unyielding determination. She moved with purpose, her eyes focused, jaw set, and every step a statement that she would not be dismissed or silent. For years she had cultivated composure and strategic patience in her professional life, but today that composure was sharpened by a mother's protective fire. The viral storm surrounding Zariah had spilled far beyond school walls, twisting into narratives that questioned not only her intelligence and poise but her right to exist visibly and unthreatened in spaces she had earned. Simone knew the stakes were high, not just for her daughter, but for the subtle yet relentless patterns of bias that allowed these narratives to take root. The office was hushed, the subtle murmur of keyboards and distant phones, providing a backdrop for the storm that Simone was about to unleash. She approached her supervisor's desk, the air around her thick with tension, and spoke with the kind of controlled intensity that demanded attention. "We need to address this now," she said, her voice low but firm. "What's happening with Zariah? It's beyond schoolyard gossip. It's public, it's viral, and it's framing her in a way that's unfair, prejudiced, and frankly dangerous." Her words carried weight, both because of their content and because of the conviction behind them. Colleagues paused mid-task, glances exchanged, sensing the gravity of the situation. It wasn't long before her presence drew the attention of someone unexpected. Gregory Harland, a senior executive known for his influence over public perception and media narratives. He was the kind of person who operated in silence, yet when he noticed injustice or misrepresentation, his interventions could be decisive and far-reaching. Simone recognized the rare opportunity immediately. "Gregory," she began, her tone calculated to convey both urgency and professionalism. "This isn't just about my daughter, it's about what her experience represents. I need your guidance, your voice, your ability to navigate these narratives before they spiral." Harlan studied her for a moment, his eyes assessing, calculating, then nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that he understood the implications. Zariah's viral visibility had created a complex battlefield, and Harlan's attention offered a strategic advantage she hadn't anticipated. The combination of maternal insistence and executive influence could provide leverage to counter both online misrepresentation and institutional bias. Yet Simone was acutely aware that such alliances came with nuance. Public support from a figure of authority could be empowering, but could also draw scrutiny, amplify expectations, and create new pressures. She spoke with measured precision, explaining the details of the viral video, the cryptic messages Zariah had received, and the subtle biases she had observed from both peers and teachers. Every word was deliberate, emphasizing both urgency and credibility, demonstrating that the situation required careful navigation rather than reactive measures. Harlan leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers steepled, the subtle gesture of consideration that carried silent power. "I understand," he said, voice calm, yet resonant with authority. "We need a plan that protects her, validates her integrity, and controls the narrative before misinformation takes hold. But we have to be careful. Any misstep could escalate public scrutiny or miss the facts further." His measured words were a validation of both Simone's instincts and the careful strategies she had already begun formulating. Zariah's calmness, her mother's urgency, and Harlan's influence created a triad of potential action that could shift public perception decisively. While they discussed strategy, Simone's mind was only partially on the logistics. Her thoughts kept returning to Zariah, the composure she had maintained in class, the way she had navigated the cafeteria, and the recent police encounter that had left her shaken yet resilient. The viral video, the cryptic online clip, and the ongoing debate had become more than a matter of school gossip. It had evolved into a test of identity, bias, and systemic expectation. Simone's maternal intuition urged immediate action, yet her professional acumen reminded her that patience, precision, and strategy were essential. The conversation with Harlan intensified, each idea layered with potential outcomes and consequences. They weighed options: how to issue a statement, whether to engage directly with media outlets, how to clarify the context of the video without amplifying negative assumptions, and how to subtly expose the underlying bias that had fueled public misjudgment. The room buzzed not with noise, but with anticipation, the kind of tension that comes when multiple high-stakes possibilities intersect, each carrying both opportunity and risk. Then, just as they began to align on a potential plan, a sudden, unexpected revelation threatened to destabilize everything. An email notification popped up on Harlan's screen, flagged urgent. Simone leaned forward instinctively, curiosity and anxiety intertwining. The message contained information about one of Zariah's classmates, someone previously assumed to be supportive or neutral, revealing a hidden involvement that directly connected them to the viral video's creation and subtle manipulation. The classmate, it seemed, had played a role in editing or selectively sharing footage in a way that could compromise Zariah's integrity, influence public perception, and potentially escalate bias further. Simone felt a surge of shock, disbelief, and controlled anger. The realization reframed the situation entirely. The ally she had found in Harlan now faced a more complex challenge, not only protecting Zariah from public misrepresentation, but also navigating the web of interpersonal deception that had grown unchecked. The carefully constructed narrative of victim, observer, and supporter was no longer intact. Zariah's ability to maintain composure, which had been her primary defense against bias, now faced a heading threat embedded within her own social environment. Harlan's eyes narrowed slightly as he absorbed the revelation. "This changes the strategy," he said softly, though the words carried a weight of authority that commanded attention. "We need to address the internal manipulation, as much as the public narrative. If this classmate's involvement is exposed incorrectly, it could backfire, and the focus would shift away from Zariah's integrity to perceived drama or conflict." Simone nodded, absorbing both the challenge and the opportunity. The situation required delicate handling, combining legal, social, and psychological strategy, all aimed at preserving Zariah's dignity while exposing bias and deception effectively. As they discussed next steps, Simone felt a renewed sense of urgency. The viral video, the cryptic messages, the subtle bias at school, and now the hidden interference of a classmate created a landscape of unpredictability. Every word, action, and statement had to be measured, yet swift. The stakes were higher than ever. Zariah's reputation, her safety, and her emotional well-being were all intertwined with a narrative that could spiral out of control if mishandled. Simone understood that this was not just about protecting her daughter, it was about challenging systemic assumptions, confronting subtle bias, and navigating a world where visibility often invited judgment. Even with Harlan's support, Simone knew the emotional and social calculus was complex. They had influence, but it was a double-edged sword. Visibility could protect or expose, advocacy could empower or escalate, and any misstep could transform their carefully considered strategy into chaos. She recognized that the presence of allies, while essential, required trust, coordination, and vigilance against unforeseen complications. Each potential move was a calculation, balancing risk and reward, timing and perception, emotion and strategy. Before a plan could take shape, a second notification arrived, this time from Zariah herself, containing a new clip she had secretly recorded, revealing a twist about the same classmates' intentions that neither Simone nor Harlan had anticipated, threatening to topple their carefully constructed strategy and leave them scrambling to protect her at the highest stakes yet. Zariah Collins had always believed she could read people, discern their intentions through careful observation of expression, posture, and voice. But the recent whirlwind of attention, viral videos, cryptic messages, and subtle school biases had made her more cautious, more vigilant than ever. It was during this heightened state of awareness that she began to notice something unsettling about one of her classmates, Jordan Avery. On the surface, Jordan appeared supportive, polite in conversation, offering small gestures of encouragement, and subtly aligning himself with her in the social hierarchy of the classroom. He smiled at her in the hallways, complimented her work during group activities, and had even been the first to defend her in whispered cafeteria debates. Yet Zariah's instincts, the finely tuned radar that had allowed her to navigate so many subtle traps before, picked up a quiet undercurrent, a calculated energy that didn't match the warmth he projected. Jordan's friendliness, Zariah realized, was strategic. There was a precision to his words, a timing that seemed tailored to maximize exposure without revealing intent. He always appeared supportive when an adult or an influential peer was observing, yet in private his interactions carried subtle manipulations, leading conversations toward her vulnerabilities, framing her composure in ways that could be twisted, and probing for details about her viral presence, without appearing intrusive. The realization settled in, like ice in her chest. Jordan was not merely an ally. He was someone attempting to exploit the narrative she had unintentionally created, positioning himself to benefit socially, academically, or even publicly from the attention she had garnered. Zariah watched him from across the room during a class project, her eyes sharp but calm, noting the micro-expressions that gave away his intentions. Jordan spoke in quiet tones with another student, gesturing toward her with subtle emphasis, ensuring he was overheard but not directly implicated. His smile was precise, practiced, almost imperceptibly patronizing, as though he were the one orchestrating events rather than reacting to them. It was a cruelly intelligent form of opportunism, one designed to benefit without confrontation, to capitalize on perception without taking visible responsibility. Every instinct Zariah had honed over years of navigating bias and expectation screamed that she needed to tread carefully. The tension was compounded by the fact that Jordan's actions were not overtly malicious, at least not in any way that could be directly proven. His manipulations were subtle, emotional, and psychological, threading through social interactions like an invisible current. To others he was the supportive classmate, the quiet observer who defended her when convenient. To Zariah, however, he was a potential threat, a variable that could undermine her carefully maintained composure and the alliances she had painstakingly built. She understood that confronting him prematurely could backfire, drawing scrutiny, creating the perception of paranoia, or giving him the narrative advantage he sought. As the day progressed, Zariah noticed other indicators of Jordan's ambition. He had begun casually dropping mentions of her viral video in conversations with teachers and peers, framing her calm composure in ways that subtly questioned her authenticity. Phrases like, "I guess some people just handle pressure differently," or "she seems so composed it's hard to tell what she's really thinking," were strategically vague but suggestive, casting doubt without direct accusation. It was psychological warfare in miniature, a masterclass in manipulating perception, and Zariah recognized it immediately. The awareness tightened her chest, sharpened her focus, and reminded her that vigilance was now not just a choice but a necessity. The subtlety of his actions made the entire social environment volatile. Peers, unaware of the hidden intentions behind his comments, began to watch her through the lens he created, filtering her calm and competence through the narrative he was establishing. Some students admired her resilience, others grew skeptical, and a few whispered in agreement with the framing he provided, reinforcing the idea that her composure was something unusual, perhaps unnatural. Zariah felt the tension of isolation creeping in, the strange and familiar loneliness of being both admired and scrutinized, celebrated and subtly undermined, all at once. Every interaction required precision, every word a calculated step to maintain control over the narrative. Then came the unexpected twist that shifted the dynamics entirely. Jordan, emboldened by the subtle manipulation he had woven, miscalculated. During a casual lunch conversation, he inadvertently revealed knowledge of details from the viral video that no one outside the recording environment should have known. His expression faltered for just a second, a micro-expression of overconfidence, and Zariah recognized the clue immediately. He had been involved, knowingly or unknowingly, in shaping the video's narrative beyond casual observation. This revelation redefined the threat. Jordan was not just exploiting her story for personal gain. He had actively influenced the content, potentially skewing public perception and manipulating bias in ways that could harm her both socially and emotionally. Zariah's mind raced, weighing her options. Confrontation was risky. The classroom, teachers, and the viral storm of attention created a delicate social ecosystem, where any overt action could be misinterpreted and weaponized. Silence carried risks as well. Unchecked, Jordan's manipulations could solidify, further spreading misperceptions and reinforcing bias. Her internal calculation had to account for timing, witnesses, and potential consequences, each factor layered with complexity. Her heartbeat was steady, controlled, yet a surge of adrenaline heightened her awareness of the stakes. The balance of power in the classroom was no longer static. It was a dynamic contest, one that required both precision and strategic patience. As the subtle tension escalated, an unexpected intervention occurred. One of Zariah's peers, who had previously remained neutral in the social currents surrounding her, spoke up during a group discussion. The comment was carefully crafted, a subtle acknowledgement of Jordan's misstep, without directly accusing him. "I think it's important to remember the context," they said, glancing briefly at Jordan, then at Zariah. "Sometimes people edit things, and the full picture matters more than what you see. The statement introduced ambiguity, shifting attention away from Zariah's isolated response and subtly undermining Jordan's framing of events. The classroom dynamic shifted instantly. Students who had been observing, waiting for a moment to choose sides, now hesitated, uncertain where loyalty, trust, or judgment should fall. The intervention was minor in appearance, but monumental in effect. Jordan, previously confident in his subtle manipulations, now faced visible scrutiny, while Zariah's position became strengthened, not through confrontation but through the exposure of underlying bias and misperception. The silent recalibration of social power rippled through the classroom, leaving everyone questioning allegiances, motives, and the integrity of perceived narratives. Zariah, observing the shift, felt a cautious optimism, a fleeting sense of leverage, tempered by the awareness that the next moves would be just as critical. Even as the tension remained, Zariah recognized that the situation was far from resolved. Jordan's ambition, now exposed in part, could manifest in unpredictable ways, while the peer who intervened had altered the balance only temporarily. Every glance, every whispered conversation, and every subtle shift in behavior carried latent consequences. The emotional stakes, the social scrutiny, and the pervasive undercurrent of bias combined into a landscape that demanded constant awareness and strategic precision. Zariah understood that navigating it successfully required calm, intelligence, and an unwavering attention to subtle cues. Just as betrayal seemed inevitable, another subtle but decisive intervention occurred. A new message surfaced from an unknown source, revealing a hidden connection between Jordan and a wider scheme to manipulate perception, leaving everyone in the classroom and online questioning loyalties and intentions, and forcing Zariah to confront an even deeper web of deception than she had imagined. Zariah Collins felt the air shift the moment she stepped into the school board hearing room. The fluorescent lighting was harsh, sterile, and unforgiving, reflecting off polished wood and mirrored surfaces in a way that made every movement, every gesture, feel magnified. Rows of chairs were filled with parents, teachers, and a few students, all quietly observing, their expressions ranging from curiosity to judgment. At the front, the board members sat behind a long, imposing desk, their faces carefully neutral, though Zariah could detect the subtle hints of skepticism, doubt, and unspoken assumptions in the slight furrows of brows and the narrowing of eyes. Every word spoken here carried weight, every pause could shift perception, and Zariah's every movement was being catalogued in real time. The tension in the room was palpable. Zariah's pulse thrummed in rhythm, with the quiet murmurs of the audience, as she made her way to the designated spot. She felt the invisible weight of expectation, judgment, and subtle racial bias pressing on her. The viral video, the cryptic online clip, and the unfolding social dynamics had led her here, to a place where authority and perception intersected. Her composure, honed through countless moments of scrutiny, was now her armor, yet the stakes felt higher than ever. One misstep, one sign of nervousness, and her integrity could be questioned, not merely as a student, but as a representative of what her community deemed possible. Chairing the meeting, Principal Henderson cleared his throat, an official signal that the hearing was about to begin. His tone was neutral, professional, but Zariah sensed the underlying tension. "We are here to discuss the recent incidents surrounding student behavior and online attention," he began, carefully scanning the room. "We expect clarity, honesty, and respect from all parties involved." Every word was layered, hinting at the implicit expectations and the unspoken standards that had been subtly enforced since Zariah first entered the school. The phrasing was precise, designed to project fairness while simultaneously reminding her that her presence was under extraordinary scrutiny. Zariah's eyes swept across the room. Teachers she had respected looked on, some with thinly veiled skepticism, others with barely perceptible support. The subtle biases she had encountered in classrooms, online, and in social spaces were concentrated here in ways that amplified every emotional beat, every calculated movement. She understood immediately that her approach had to be deliberate, poised, and precise. Composure alone would not be enough. She needed strategy, awareness, and an unshakable understanding of both the social and racial dynamics at play. The first to speak was a teacher whose subtle biases had surfaced during previous interactions. "Zariah has demonstrated unusual composure in recent events," the teacher said, voice polite yet edged with judgment. "While her behavior in class is commendable academically, it has created confusion among students and staff. There is concern that this may have influenced perceptions unfairly, potentially creating disruption. The phrasing was precise but insidious, a reflection of both admiration and prejudice. Zariah could feel the emotional tension rise, the way words that seemed neutral could carry layers of skepticism rooted in bias. Zariah remained still, her posture impeccable, her breathing measured, her expression neutral yet resolute. She knew this was a performance in restraint, as much as articulation. The social stakes were monumental. Every observer was watching for a slip, a sign of weakness, or an emotional reaction that could be construed as inappropriate. She understood that her calmness, which had been her defense in the classroom and the cafeteria, was now her greatest weapon. It allowed her to absorb subtle attacks, deflect insinuations, and maintain control over the narrative, even in a room filled with authority figures and judgment. As discussion continued, whispers circulated among parents and peers, some expressing admiration, others thinly veiled resentment. Zariah noted the patterns, the way her composure caused unease, the way observers projected assumptions onto her behavior, and the way subtle racial biases threaded through even the most measured commentary. It was a reminder that she was not merely defending herself academically or socially. She was challenging assumptions about race, intelligence, and decorum in a space where authority often reinforced systemic bias. Every carefully chosen word, every unflinching glance, became a declaration of presence and resilience. Unexpectedly, a member of the board introduced a new element, a brief report from the IT department, summarizing the online activity surrounding Zariah's viral video. The report detailed shares, comments, and engagement metrics, but contained no context regarding editing or selective framing. The numbers painted a narrative of both admiration and controversy, but the framing seemed incomplete, subtly highlighting controversy without capturing the truth. Zariah's pulse quickened. She realized the implications immediately. The online narrative could be weaponized against her if misinterpreted, and the board's partial understanding could skew perception. Her next words, carefully considered, needed to both clarify and assert integrity without appearing defensive. Zariah spoke calmly, articulating her perspective on the events with precision. She emphasized that her calmness had been genuine, her composure deliberate, and her actions intended to navigate bias, not provoke it. She subtly highlighted the importance of context, urging the board to consider intent and circumstance, rather than solely perception. Her voice was measured, yet carried an undercurrent of quiet strength that demanded attention. For a moment, the room seemed suspended, observers recalibrating their assumptions, weighing her words against their initial judgments, and reassessing their understanding of the viral incident and its impact. Then, the unexpected twist occurred. A board member leaned forward and presented evidence that had not been anticipated. A second video, previously unreviewed, showing a portion of the original test incident that had been edited before going viral. The footage revealed nuances in interactions between students, subtle edits that could have been interpreted to exaggerate tension, and even included brief, indirect gestures of encouragement that had been omitted in the first clip. The revelation threw the entire narrative into uncertainty. Observers exchanged glances, whispers spread across the room, and Zariah's calculated calm momentarily met an internal spike of adrenaline. The controlled environment she had relied on now felt precarious, the stakes higher than they had ever been. The effect on the board was immediate. Members shifted in their seats, reviewing the new evidence with visible surprise and curiosity. Comments were hushed but filled with speculation. Questions about editing, intent, and interpretation bubbled beneath the formal procedural language. Zariah recognized the subtle recalibration in power dynamics. The room's collective assumptions had been challenged. Bias and judgment were now intertwined with uncertainty. Her presence, once scrutinized and doubted, was now juxtaposed against ambiguity created by incomplete evidence, forcing every observer to reconsider their stance. In this charged atmosphere, Zariah remained poised, her composure unshaken outwardly, but internally alert. She understood the critical balance. Any overt reaction could be interpreted as validation or defensiveness, and any hesitation could reinforce assumptions of guilt or impropriety. Her mind raced, calculating next steps while maintaining the illusion of calm. She was acutely aware that in this environment, perception often outweighed fact, and she needed to assert clarity through measured articulation and the quiet, undeniable weight of presence. Just as the board seemed ready to rule against her, the unexpected evidence of the second video created a shockwave of uncertainty, leaving Zariah, the board members, and the audience suspended in anticipation, questioning the narrative. the interpretation of events, and the very assumptions that had framed the discussion up to this point. The morning after the school board hearing, Zariah Collins awoke to the relentless pulse of notifications flooding her phone. Overnight, her story had leapt from local chatter to national attention. News outlets framed her calm demeanor during the viral classroom incident as a symbolic act of resilience, portraying her as a young black student quietly defying the expectations imposed by systemic prejudice. Headlines ranged from celebratory highlighting her composure and intelligence to subtly condescending, questioning why her actions were considered extraordinary, simply because of who she was. Each new alert carried weight, magnifying the emotional gravity of the situation, and reminding her that visibility came at a cost. Zariah scrolled through the coverage, each story reinforcing the duality of public attention, admiration and scrutiny entwined in an uneasy balance. Social media had become both a platform of support and a battleground of bias. Comment sections overflowed with opinions, interpretations, and assumptions, some overtly critical, others passive-aggressively condescending. One viral post praised her as a shining example of poise under pressure, while another questioned her composure. How much of that calm is natural? Is she being coached? Is it staged? The phrasing carried implicit racial bias, subtly framing her actions as an anomaly requiring justification. Zariah's pulse quickened at the realization that even her composure was being dissected, parsed, and judged through a lens she could not fully control. The reach of the media storm extended beyond the online sphere. Local television stations sought interviews with parents and teachers, asking for reactions that could be edited to frame Zariah in a variety of ways. Colleagues at her mother's workplace and friends' families were drawn into discussions about her viral presence, many unaware of the subtle injustices she faced daily. The public perception of her calm had been amplified into a symbol, a narrative of resistance, resilience, and quiet defiance. But with each amplification, her private life became more exposed, more vulnerable. Zariah felt the weight of it, the constant awareness that any misstep or misinterpretation could ripple far beyond the classroom or cafeteria, affecting not just her but her family, her peers, and her reputation. Amid this maelstrom, Zariah remained outwardly composed. She had long practiced the art of maintaining calm under observation, of allowing the emotional currents around her to pass while she calculated responses internally. Each article, each headline, each social media post was scrutinized with the same meticulous attention she had applied to the pressure test. She cataloged the biases, identified the narratives being spun, and noted the subtle ways in which language was weaponized against her identity. Her mind raced with strategy, balancing the need for visibility and truth against the risk of misrepresentation or emotional overexposure. Her mother, Zariah Collins, became an anchor amidst the chaos. Together they navigated the complex terrain of media engagement, crafting statements that affirmed Zariah's integrity without escalating conflict. They coordinated with Gregory Harland, the executive ally who had offered influence over public perception, ensuring that each response reinforced both personal dignity and strategic control over narrative. The triad, Zariah's composure, Simone's determination, and Harlan's influence created a formidable defense, yet it could not fully mitigate the unpredictability of public opinion. Every new post, every retweet, every headline carried potential for misinterpretation, adding layers of emotional and strategic complexity to an already fraught situation. The media attention also introduced unexpected challenges within the school community. Teachers who had previously expressed subtle biases now found themselves under scrutiny, their past comments and interactions examined in light of Zariah's rising visibility. Classmates, too, were drawn into the narrative, some supporting her publicly while privately questioning the motives and impact of the viral attention. The school environment, already tense, became a microcosm of the broader societal dynamics she faced. Admiration, envy, skepticism, and latent prejudice coexisting in a complex, often contradictory web. Zariah's awareness of these dynamics allowed her to navigate interactions strategically, but the constant calculation exacted an emotional toll. Then came the unexpected twist. A single anonymous tip arrived via email, addressed to both Zariah and her mother. Its subject line was deceptively simple: the other side of the story. Opening it, Zariah discovered a brief, cryptic message accompanied by a short video clip. The footage captured an angle of the original classroom incident that had not been widely circulated, revealing subtle interactions among students that could, if misinterpreted, suggest intent or behavior inconsistent with Zariah's composure. The implication was clear: someone had curated or highlighted moments in a way that could distort public perception. The revelation introduced a new layer of risk. threatening to undermine the careful narrative Zariah and her mother had worked to maintain. Her heart tightened as she watched the clip, the familiar churn of adrenaline and tension coursing through her veins. The public narrative that had celebrated her calm and resilience now faced potential recalibration. Even minor misinterpretations could be amplified, potentially painting her actions as staged, inauthentic, or manipulative. Zariah recognized that the stakes were no longer merely social or educational. They were now public, emotional, and symbolic, intertwining her identity with broader societal assumptions and biases. Her mind raced through contingencies: ignore the tip, respond publicly, clarify context privately, or attempt to control the leak through strategic messaging. Each option carried potential risk, yet inaction felt equally dangerous. The emotional pressure was compounded by the ambiguity of the sender. The anonymous tip could have come from a peer, a teacher, or a stranger with access to the classroom footage. The uncertainty intensified the stakes, creating a sense of psychological vulnerability that was difficult to mitigate. Zariah's training in composure, which had served her so well in classrooms, cafeterias, and school board hearings, now faced a public, unpredictable arena. Every decision had ramifications, not only for her reputation, but also for her mental and emotional well-being. She understood that the next move could shift public perception in ways she had never anticipated. Even as the storm intensified, Zariah maintained outward calm. Her posture remained poised, her expression serene, and her voice steady whenever interacting with adults or peers. Internally, however, her thoughts were a whirlwind of strategy and caution. She recognized patterns in social media behavior, the ways bias could amplify seemingly minor moments, and the emotional manipulation inherent in anonymous narrative. Every gesture, every word, and every decision had to be calculated to preserve integrity while countering potential misrepresentation. The duality of public scrutiny and private strategy created a tension that was both exhausting and exhilarating, requiring constant vigilance. The anonymous tip also prompted a broader reconsideration of the viral narrative. Zariah began connecting subtle dots. Certain classmates had spoken differently after the video went viral, teachers had displayed more guarded behavior, and online commentary contained hints of manipulation that had previously escaped notice. The sense of being watched and evaluated now extended beyond simple admiration or bias. It was an active test of her ability to manage perception, navigate emotional undercurrents, and maintain strategic calm under extraordinary pressure. Each realization sharpened her awareness, reinforcing the delicate balance she needed to maintain. Just as Zariah began to plan her next move, a second, more urgent message appeared, this time containing evidence that suggested someone close to her, not a stranger, not a teacher, might be attempting to manipulate the narrative for personal gain, threatening to redefine her story completely, and forcing her to confront betrayal, strategy, and trust in the public eye. The community center was packed, buzzing with a mixture of anticipation, gossip, and barely concealed judgment. Zariah Collins stepped through the double doors, her posture poised, her expression serene, though every nerve in her body hummed with tension. Parents, teachers, and classmates had gathered, some genuinely curious, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. She could feel their scrutiny, the way their gazes lingered with expectation, measuring her demeanor, weighing her history, and anticipating her reaction. The recent viral events, the school board hearing, and the media attention had made this gathering a stage, and Zariah, whether she wanted it or not, was the center of the performance. From the moment she walked in, whispers fluttered across the room, carried like currents of judgment. Eyes followed her movements with an intensity that left no space for error. A parent sitting near the front muttered under their breath, clearly audible to nearby friends, "I still don't understand why all this fuss is being made. She's just a student." Others glanced at her with skepticism, assuming her composure was calculated, an act, or a manipulation. The subtle biases threaded through casual observations and remarks, revealing a societal discomfort with a young black girl, whose calm intelligence and dignity defied their assumptions. Zariah absorbed it all with silent focus, aware that composure was her shield and her strategy. Her steps toward the center of the room were deliberate, measured, and designed to communicate confidence without arrogance. She scanned the crowd, noting the mixture of curiosity, doubt, and anticipation. Teachers who had subtly questioned her integrity during classroom events now sat with cautious interest, attempting neutrality while assessing her presence. Classmates she thought were allies cast fleeting glances, uncertain whether to openly support her or remain cautious in the charged atmosphere. The emotional tension in the room was palpable. Every second of observation weighed on her like a physical presence, Yet Zariah's calm remained intact, a beacon of resilience amidst the scrutiny. The event organizers began introductions, explaining the purpose of the gathering, a community dialogue on student behavior, online media influence, and educational equity. As the floor opened for questions, murmurs rose and fell like waves. Some pointed, others masked as polite curiosity. The first question came from a parent whose tone carried the faintest edge of skepticism. Zariah, some people say your calmness is unnatural, that it sets unrealistic expectations for other students. How do you respond to that? The phrasing was subtle, yet loaded with judgment, implying that her presence was disruptive, that her very composure was a problem in the eyes of some adults. Zariah's response was measured and deliberate. She emphasized authenticity, the importance of personal integrity, and the need for understanding context over assumptions. Every word was chosen to maintain poise, while subtly countering the biases embedded in the question. Her voice carried calm authority, precise and unshakable, forcing the audience to reconcile their preconceptions with her evident composure and intelligence. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Even those prepared to doubt her seemed momentarily unsettled by the quiet power of her presence. As the questioning continued, classmates and adults began probing further, testing the limits of her patience and emotional control. Each question, though framed as inquiry, carried subtle insinuations. "Don't you feel pressure to act a certain way now that everyone is watching?" asked a teacher, tone deceptively neutral, eyes searching for signs of weakness. Zariah responded with unwavering calm, explaining that pressure was inevitable, that composure was a skill developed through experience, and that integrity was a choice she exercised daily. Her articulation subtly reframed the narrative. What others perceived as unusual or performative was, in reality, intentional mastery over circumstance. The room's energy intensified as whispers spread among the audience. Some were impressed, others skeptical, and a few visibly uncomfortable. Zariah noticed a group of peers exchanging uncertain glances, unsure whether to express support or remain cautious. Even adults leaned forward, curious yet hesitant, measuring the impact of her words. The social dynamics were intricate. Every gesture, every pause, every measured breath communicated as much as her actual words. Zariah's awareness of this invisible communication gave her a tactical advantage, one that allowed her to assert authority through subtlety and poise rather than confrontation. Then, an unexpected twist erupted. A student from the back, someone previously considered neutral or supportive, raised a hand and began questioning the framing of the viral video, hinting that some footage might have been manipulated. Their voice carried the dual weight of doubt and revelation, suggesting that the online narrative, which had cast Zariah as a symbol of calm, might have been selectively curated by peers seeking attention or influence. The room froze for a moment, the silence electric. Audience members exchanged shocked glances, whispers swelling into audible murmurs, as the complexity of the situation crystallized in everyone's mind. Zariah's pulse quickened slightly. Though she remained outwardly composed, the intervention introduced uncertainty, destabilizing assumptions about both her behavior and the motivations of others. Her mind raced, assessing the implications. The revelation could undermine previous perceptions, fuel further bias, or inadvertently highlight loyalty and betrayal among classmates. Yet she responded with calculated clarity, acknowledging the possibility of manipulation while reinforcing her own integrity and focus. The subtle balance between defense, authority, and emotional poise now carried even higher stakes, and every reaction she elicited would shape the evolving social landscape. The murmurs grew louder, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Parents whispered to each other, questioning the validity of what they had seen online. Teachers adjusted their posture, suddenly aware that the perception they had conveyed previously might now be reconsidered. Classmates who had positioned themselves as allies or adversaries hesitated, unsure where their loyalties should lie. The confrontation, already public, had escalated into a broader social reckoning, where composure, perception, and truth collided in a volatile mix. Zariah's ability to navigate this charged environment with grace became a test of both strategy and endurance, an emotional crucible she had to endure while maintaining control over the narrative. Then came the sudden incident that would define the event. As Zariah concluded a measured statement about integrity and perception, a technical malfunction caused the large projector screen to flicker, revealing a private segment of the viral video that had not been intended for public viewing. The room gasped collectively. The clip showed brief interactions between students that could be misinterpreted, moments taken out of context that carried the potential to shift opinion instantly. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity and judgment to raw, heightened tension. Every eye in the room focused on her, waiting, anticipating how she would respond under this unexpected escalation. Zariah felt the surge of adrenaline spike, a familiar yet intense sensation. The calm she had maintained through countless challenges, the classroom, cafeteria, media scrutiny, was now tested in real time, in a public space where interpretation and bias were amplified. Every reaction mattered. Every gesture or hesitation could be magnified and misconstrued. She stood poised, heart steady, voice controlled, preparing to assert clarity while countering the implicit judgments, aware that the next few seconds would define both perception and influence in ways beyond her control. Just as she demonstrated composure that shocked the audience, a sudden incident forced an immediate decision. A parent unexpectedly rose to challenge her publicly, questioning the integrity of the video and the intentions of students involved, leaving the crowd and viewers holding their breath, anticipating how Zariah would respond. Unprecedented scrutiny and pressure. The Collins family gathered in their living room, the air thick with tension and the faint hum of distant traffic outside. Zariah sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded neatly in her lap, while her mother, Simone, leaned against the armrest, eyes fixed on the attorney seated across from them. The room felt smaller than usual, compressed by the weight of the conversation. For weeks, Zariah had navigated the viral attention, the subtle biases in school, and the scrutiny of her peers with careful composure. Now, for the first time, the scope of the challenge expanded far beyond classroom walls. The threat wasn't just social or emotional. It was legal, institutional, and ominously real. Attorney Lillian Drake exuded quiet authority. She had represented families in high-profile civil rights cases before, and every word she spoke carried precision, expertise, and subtle caution. Zariah's situation, she began, voice measured yet compelling, has ramifications beyond the school environment. The viral video, the classroom interactions, and the online discussions could trigger lawsuits, formal investigations, or public scrutiny that may involve not only students but faculty and administrators. Her gaze swept the room, ensuring that both mother and daughter absorbed the full gravity of the statement. Zariah's pulse quickened, not from fear of herself, but from the realization that forces beyond her control were mobilizing around the narrative she had painstakingly managed. Simone's lips pressed together, a mixture of worry and determination. "We've done everything we can," she said, her voice firm yet edged with concern. "We've guided her, supported her, and tried to maintain context. But what else can we do if the legal stakes escalate?" Drake nodded, acknowledging the question without answering directly. She leaned forward slightly, the movement emphasizing the seriousness of her assessment. "The key is strategy," she said. "Careful documentation, measured responses, and alignment with trusted allies are essential. Anything impulsive could be used to challenge credibility or integrity, and given the racial undertones inherent in this case, the consequences could extend well beyond Zariah's immediate circle." Zariah listened with a calm exterior, yet inside her mind raced. She had always understood bias and injustice at a personal level, had navigated subtle microaggressions and overt skepticism with careful precision. But the legal dimension introduced a new layer entirely. Lawsuits, media scrutiny, and potential challenges to her credibility weren't just abstract threats. They were tangible, potentially career-defining for teachers and administrators, and emotionally destabilizing for students and families. Every action, every word, and every interaction now had the weight of legal consequence. The viral video, once a symbol of calm and resilience, had evolved into a complex legal and social battleground. Drake continued, walking the family through potential scenarios. "We must anticipate challenges from multiple directions. Faculty members could face scrutiny for perceived negligence. Other students' families may file claims or demand explanations, and the media, national or local, will dissect every detail, often without understanding context." Her voice was calm, professional, yet carried a subtle edge that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Zariah felt the familiar tension of scrutiny amplify, the same intensity she had faced in classrooms and at community events, now refracted through the lens of legality and systemic bias. Then came an unexpected twist. Drake reached into her briefcase and withdrew a confidential document she had recently obtained. "There's another layer here," she said, her tone neutral but weighty. She placed the paper on the table, sliding it towards Simone. This shows a connection between one of Zariah's classmates and administrative decisions related to the viral incident. Depending on how it's interpreted, it could either support Zariah's integrity or implicate someone close to her in manipulative behavior. The room went silent, the gravity of the revelation settling like a stone in their chests. Zariah leaned forward slightly, sensing the implication immediately. The narrative was no longer confined to her behavior or public perception. It now intertwined with hidden alliances, motives, and potential breaches of trust. The document detailed emails and internal communications that had previously gone unnoticed. Subtle manipulations of the video footage, selective sharing of clips, and hints at framing intended to shape perception all pointed toward a coordinated effort by someone within the school's sphere. Zariah's calm exterior masked the storm inside her mind. She understood the delicate balance. Revealing the document's contents indiscriminately could vindicate her, yet expose vulnerabilities in those she had previously trusted. Every potential action carried both emotional and legal consequences, and the stakes had just expanded dramatically. Simone's hand rested on Zariah's shoulder, a silent reminder of support and solidarity. "We have to handle this carefully," she said softly. "One misstep, one revelation shared publicly without context, could escalate everything, legally, socially, and emotionally. We need to control the narrative, not react to it." Drake nodded, outlining the next steps: selective dissemination of information, consultation with media experts, and coordination with trusted allies to ensure that any disclosure maintained credibility while minimizing potential harm. The strategy was complex, layered, and exhausting in its intricacy. Zariah absorbed the strategy while simultaneously grappling with the emotional weight of the revelation. She had always been aware of bias and manipulation, but the evidence of collusion or hidden motives within her immediate school environment was a new challenge entirely. Her calm demeanor, cultivated over years of subtle battles and observations, was now paired with heightened strategic awareness. Every conversation, every online response, every social interaction became a measured exercise in preserving integrity while anticipating deception, manipulation, and potential legal ramifications. Drake's guidance extended into specific scenarios, simulating potential media inquiries, peer interactions, and administrative confrontations. If questioned publicly about these interactions, she said, voice deliberate, we must respond with clarity, context, and calm authority. Misinterpretation or emotional reaction could be leveraged against Zariah in ways that reinforce bias or undermine credibility. Each scenario layered additional tension, requiring Zariah to maintain her composure while internalizing complex strategic consideration. The emotional weight was heavy, yet the clarity of purpose sharpened her focus, turning anxiety into disciplined attention. Then, just as they began to consolidate a strategy, a subtle but critical development emerged. Drake's assistant arrived with another confidential file, this one revealing that the student implicated in the internal communications had indirect ties to an influential member of the school board. The implications were immediate and profound. Exposure of manipulation could either vindicate Zariah or create a political and social backlash that threatened to undermine not only her credibility, but the integrity of the adults overseeing the school. The layered complexity of the situation transformed the private family consultation into a high-stakes navigation of social, legal, and emotional dynamics simultaneously. Zariah's mind raced. She understood that composure alone, though powerful, was not sufficient. She would need to deploy emotional intelligence, strategic restraint, and careful judgment in every interaction moving forward. The viral attention, community scrutiny, media presence, and now potential legal ramifications converged into a landscape where a single miscalculation could have exponential consequences. Every instinct honed through years of navigating microaggressions, subtle biases, and personal challenges now had to be applied to a situation amplified beyond the classroom, beyond school, and into public legal and social scrutiny. Just as the family began to formulate a plan to protect Zariah and navigate the legal landscape, an anonymous tip arrived in their inbox, containing a recording that suggested someone previously trusted might be actively manipulating the narrative for personal gain, threatening to expose vulnerabilities that could either exonerate or implicate those closest to her, leaving the next steps fraught with uncertainty and moral complexity. Zariah Collins sat alone in her room, the hum of her phone and the distant sounds of traffic outside amplifying a silence she had long avoided. The walls, usually a comforting enclosure, now felt like a cage, pressing in with the weight of weeks of scrutiny, whispers, and judgment. Each notification, every news headline, and every social media post that had once seemed distant, now felt like a physical presence, layering expectation, praise, and condemnation onto her shoulders. She had faced teachers' subtle biases, classmates' veiled jealousy, and the viral soar of public attention, but the full emotional impact, the private gnawing fatigue that came from being constantly observed, measured, and interpreted, hit her now in waves that left her momentarily breathless. The room was suffused with tension, a reflection of the internal landscape Zariah was navigating. She replayed every moment, the viral video's unexpected fame, the subtle manipulations by classmates, the cryptic online messages, the police profiling incident that had left her shaken, and the scrutiny of adults whose judgment she could neither evade nor control. Each interaction, each event, had accumulated like stones in her chest. She realized that the weight of public perception and racial bias wasn't just external, it was internalized, shaping her thoughts, emotions, and even her strategies for self-preservation. The quiet room became a mirror, reflecting both resilience and exhaustion in equal measure. Her mother's voice floated from memory, calm yet insistent, reminding her that integrity and composure were her allies. But even that reassurance was layered with complexity. Simone Collins had fought alongside her, navigating media, allies, and legal counsel. Yet Zariah could feel the pressure her mother bore as well. Each decision carried consequences not just for herself but for her family, for her classmates, and even for those who had chosen to support her publicly. The ripple effects of bias, manipulation, and visibility extended far beyond her immediate experience, creating a network of emotional and social pressures that she could neither ignore nor fully control. Zariah closed her eyes, letting the memories of whispered doubts, subtle smirks, and veiled accusations wash over her. Each was a reminder of the cumulative power of racial bias and societal expectation. She thought of classmates who had smiled supportively yet secretly plotted to leverage her story, of teachers who had complimented her in public but questioned her authenticity privately, and of strangers who had dissected her every gesture online. The weight of judgment, racially coded, emotionally charged, and psychologically persistent, pressed down with a force that left her simultaneously alert and weary. Every breath was a negotiation between maintaining composure and acknowledging the emotional toll that the constant surveillance had exacted. The unexpected twist came as she reviewed the messages from anonymous sources and allies alike. One email suggested that someone she had trusted, a peer who had outwardly appeared supportive, might have been manipulating the narrative behind the scenes. The betrayal, subtle yet profound, forced her to reconsider previous assumptions. Trust, already precarious, now felt like a gamble. Every interaction she had had in school, every collaborative conversation, every moment of apparent solidarity, was cast in new light. The emotional stakes shifted. She had to navigate not just public perception and bias, but hidden agendas, duplicity, and moral complexity among those she had counted on. Zariah rose from her seat, pacing the room with deliberate, measured steps. The physical motion helped her process the layers of tension, the cascading effects of visibility, and the intricacies of trust that had been shattered. Each step was a reminder that she had survived scrutiny, social manipulation, and emotional attacks before, but the combination of public, legal, and interpersonal pressures now created a multifaceted crucible. She considered the viral video, the school board hearing, the cafeteria tensions, and the police encounter, realizing that the common thread was expectation. Society, peers, and authority all anticipated a reaction from her, a crack, a falter, a moment of weakness, yet none had succeeded. The emotional reckoning became tangible when she considered the personal cost of her composure. Each calculated response, each strategic silence, each carefully measured smile, had allowed her to maintain control in public. Yet in private, the toll was undeniable. Her chest tightened, her thoughts raced, and the familiar mental exercises she used to maintain calm became amplified under the weight of constant scrutiny. She acknowledged the fatigue, the loneliness, and the emotional labor she had expended to navigate prejudice, manipulation, and bias without compromising her dignity. The realization was both sobering and galvanizing. To continue forward, she would need to harness this awareness, turning vulnerability into strategy. Even as the weight of cumulative stress pressed down, Zariah found clarity. She understood that the upcoming final confrontation, whether in public forums, online discourse, or social spheres, would test not only her intellect, but her emotional fortitude. She rehearsed scenarios, imagining questions, criticisms, and provocations, Each potential challenge required a calm, deliberate response that bands composure with moral authority. The room felt smaller, her thoughts more focused, and her awareness heightened. She had navigated bias and manipulation before, but this confrontation demanded integration. The emotional, the strategic, and the ethical all converged, leaving no margin for error. Her reflection was interrupted by a soft ping from her phone. A message appeared from a trusted ally, yet its contents hinted at a twist she had not anticipated. Someone close, previously assumed loyal, might now be reconsidering their allegiance, whether due to external pressure, personal ambition, or manipulation by a third party. The revelation introduced uncertainty. Loyalty and betrayal, previously distinct, now became intertwined, leaving Zariah to reassess whom she could trust and how she would manage this final phase of scrutiny. The emotional weight of potential betrayal compounded the existing tension, forcing her to integrate strategy, intuition, and composure simultaneously. The quiet room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for confrontation, rehearsal, and reckoning. Zariah's chest tightened, awareness sharpened, and mind catalogued every detail of the potential scenarios. She understood that her calm was a weapon, her integrity a shield, and her emotional awareness a compass. The stakes were higher than ever. Public perception, racial bias, personal integrity, and the potential duplicity of those closest to her now collided, creating a crucible that required every ounce of discipline, intuition, and strategic thought she possessed. The next moves would define not only immediate outcomes, but the enduring narrative of her story. Zariah took a deep breath, allowing herself a brief acknowledgement of the emotional toll. She recognized fatigue, frustration, and the weight of accumulated bias. Yet she also felt an internal surge of determination. Composure had protected her through scrutiny, media storms, and subtle betrayals. Now it would serve as both a shield and a lens through which she could discern truth, navigate manipulation, and assert moral authority. The emotional reckoning was not a moment of weakness. It was preparation, introspection, and alignment with her values and strategy. As Zariah prepared for the final confrontation, the subtle shift in loyalty from someone she had trusted threatened to completely reshape the story's climax, leaving her to navigate a delicate balance between exposure, integrity, and the unpredictable consequences of betrayal, while the audience, both present and virtual, waited in suspended anticipation. The auditorium was tense, suffused with anticipation so thick it felt almost physical. Zariah Collins walked to the podium with deliberate precision, every movement calibrated, every step measured. The public, media representatives, school officials, parents, and classmates were all present, their eyes scanning, judging, and waiting. The previous weeks of viral videos, anonymous tips, legal threats, and subtle betrayals had culminated in this singular moment, a convergence of scrutiny and expectation. The weight of the world pressed against her shoulders, yet outwardly, she appeared serene, poised, deliberate, and ready to articulate her truth with calm authority. As she adjusted the microphone, a hush fell over the audience. Every eye was fixed on her, anticipating either a falter or an emotional outburst. Zariah took a measured breath, allowing herself to center her focus on what mattered most: integrity, clarity, and truth. She could feel the internal tension of the past weeks, the anxiety, the fatigue, the cumulative weight of subtle racial bias. But she converted it into clarity. Each prior challenge, each whispered accusation, each manipulative gesture from peers or adults had honed her ability to navigate scrutiny. Now that skill was essential, and she knew the stakes. One misstep could undo everything, while a precise response could shift perception irrevocably. The first questions came from parents and board members alike, subtly laced with doubt. Zariah one began. Some say the video doesn't capture the full context of the classroom. How do we know your behavior was genuine and not performative? The phrasing, polite on the surface, carried insinuation and implicit bias, framing composure as something unusual, requiring justification. Zariah's calm didn't waver. She spoke with measured, deliberate clarity, emphasizing authenticity, context, and integrity. Her words were neither defensive nor confrontational, yet each one carried an undeniable weight, subtly dismantling the assumptions embedded in the question, without needing to overtly challenge authority. As she continued, Zariah strategically integrated her observations of recent events, the subtle manipulations of certain classmates, the selective framing of the viral video, and the underlying currents of bias that had shaped public perception. She presented the information with clarity, carefully exposing distortions without naming or shaming unnecessarily. a technique that preserved moral authority while forcing the audience to confront their own assumptions. The effect was immediate. Murmurs ran through the crowd, observers leaned forward, and even the most skeptical faces showed signs of recalibration. The narrative was shifting before their eyes. What had been doubt, critique, and subtle bias was now being reframed through the lens of truth and strategic composure. Then came the twist that solidified the impact. A member of the board, previously assumed impartial, provided evidence that validated Zariah's account, time-stamped digital files confirming the integrity of her classroom performance and the selective nature of any viral edits. The audience collectively absorbed the revelation, and a palpable shift occurred. Skepticism waned as clarity emerged. The subtle manipulations of peers and the emotional biases of adults were exposed, not through confrontation, but through the careful, calm articulation of truth. The room's energy transformed from tension and doubt to a mix of awe, acknowledgement, and respect. Zariah's calmness was not just performative. It was strategic, a tool honed over weeks of adversity. She understood the psychological mechanics at play. Observers interpreted composure as authority, clarity as credibility, and strategic patience as moral power. Every word, gesture, and pause was intentional, reinforcing her position without creating overt conflict. The subtle biases that had fueled doubt and misinterpretation were countered with precision, leaving the community to grapple with the dissonance between perception and reality. The audience could no longer ignore her integrity. Every challenge was met not with defensiveness, but with calculated calm that amplified the truth. Even the media, previously poised to sensationalize minor conflicts, responded differently. Reporters adjusted their framing, focusing on context, integrity, and systemic issues rather than the superficial viral spectacle. Social media threads, once chaotic and biased, began trending toward accuracy, with commentary acknowledging her composure and the subtle injustices that had been at play. The narrative was being reclaimed, not by forceful argument, but by quiet, deliberate authority, a lesson in the power of restraint combined with clarity. Zariah had transformed scrutiny into a platform for truth, her calmness serving as both shield and catalyst. The subtle tension remained, however. Certain classmates shifted uneasily, realizing that any attempts to manipulate perception or exploit her story had been exposed indirectly. Teachers who had harbored implicit doubts were compelled to acknowledge her integrity publicly, whether through reassessment or silence. The entire social and institutional ecosystem, from peers to administrators, was forced into recalibration. Zariah's strategic calm had not only defended her but subtly corrected misperceptions, revealing underlying prejudice and bias without resorting to overt confrontation. The balance of power had shifted quietly, but irreversibly. Then, just as the resolution seemed within reach, an unexpected twist surfaced. A private notification reached Zariah via her phone, a message from an anonymous source that implied there were still unseen forces capable of manipulating perception. The content suggested subtle ongoing interference from someone previously trusted, hinting that while the public narrative had shifted, the battle against injustice was far from over. The revelation introduced a new layer of tension, reminding her that calm composure strategy could protect integrity, but vigilance remained necessary. The fight against bias and manipulation extended beyond a single event, into ongoing social and psychological dynamics. Zariah's eyes narrowed briefly, her mind processing the implication, while maintaining the calm exterior that had become her signature. She understood immediately. The victory achieved in the auditorium, while significant, was partial. Bias and manipulation were persistent forces, often subtle, and the final resolution of this chapter did not signify the end of the challenge. Yet she also understood the power of her approach, strategic, deliberate, and emotionally disciplined. Every observer had witnessed a display of integrity, calm, and moral clarity that could not be undone, even if future manipulations arose. The crowd slowly shifted, some nodding in acknowledgement, others visibly reconsidering previous assumptions. Parents whispered among themselves, classmates exchanged uncertain glances, and teachers recalibrated their assessments of her character and resilience. Zariah's calm had created a ripple effect that extended beyond immediate perception, influencing social dynamics, institutional understanding, and public discourse. Even as she remained poised, internally she cataloged the ongoing risks, recognizing that vigilance, strategy, and emotional intelligence would remain critical in defending against subtle, enduring biases. Finally, as the audience prepared to leave, a subtle yet chilling moment occurred. A figure in the back of the room, a parent who had been quietly skeptical throughout, made a comment under their breath hinting that others in positions of influence might still resist acknowledgement of the underlying injustices. The words were soft, but the implication was unmistakable. While the immediate challenge had been met with composure and strategic authority, the broader fight against systemic bias, manipulation, and racial prejudice remained ongoing. Zariah felt the familiar surge of determination, understanding that victory was never final, and vigilance would always be necessary. Just when resolution seemed possible, the subtle but chilling implication of ongoing influence and manipulation hinted that the fight against injustice was far from over, leaving Zariah, her family, and the community to reckon with the enduring struggle for integrity, fairness, and truth in a world that would continue to challenge them. If Zariah's courage and composure moved you, type yes in the comments to show your support. How would you respond if you faced the same injustice she did? Make sure to subscribe to follow stories that shine a light on hidden biases and give voices to those who face injustice every day. Together we can stand against silence, challenge prejudice, and make a difference that matters.